Welcome to the first episode in a three-part Legendarium series about New England's vampire scare. In Part 1, Bloody Death, Bloodier, Afterlife, we will talk about the origins of New England's vampire scare during the 19th century. Not long after the American Revolution, some unfortunate New England villages endured outbreaks of tuberculosis, then called consumption. It struck entire families and even whole communities. This bacterial lung disease left feverish sufferers with an ashen appearance and sunken eyes. Sometimes blood dripped from their mouths. Dying people could cough up cupfuls of blood at a time. Doctors, using empirical reasoning, local customs, magic, and sometimes wishful thinking, could only offer bizarre explanations like too much water in the soil or too much dancing. One 18th century description of tuberculosis read, "The emaciated figure strikes one with terror, the forehead covered with drops of sweat, the cheeks painted with a livid crimson, the eyes sunk, the breath offensive, quick and laborious, and the cough so incessant as to scarce allow the wretched sufferer time to tell his complaints." Almost 2% of the region's population died from tuberculosis between 1786 and 1800, making it the leading cause of death in the Northeast. Some victims endured multiple bouts of the disease, which could go in and out of remission over months or even years. Some families escaped intact, while the terrible illness nearly wiped others out. Still others simply carried the disease and spread it to their loved ones while they remained apparently healthy. With medical science unable to explain the catastrophe or alleviate it, people turned to the superstition that influenced their lives so much. Despite their puritanical reputation, rural New England remained a semi-pagan and superstitious place. Only 10% of people in some tiny hamlets belonged to a church, prompting missionaries to come from more observant communities. They returned lamenting that many in such hamlets had no church going and no Bibles. In place of organized worship, superstition reigned. Rural New Englanders believed in magical springs with healing powers, that dead bodies bled in the presence of their murderers, and that seeing stones could lead one to treasure. People buried shoes by the fireplace to catch Satan if he came down the chimney, and they carved daisy wheels into door frames to ward off wicked spirits. Unsurprisingly, supernatural creatures figured into local folklore. Villagers believed that the first to die of tuberculosis somehow became vampires. They further believed that these sharp-toothed bloodsuckers wriggled out of their graves, stalked their own families, and slowly sucked the blood from them until they died horrible deaths. New Englanders brought this superstition with them from Europe. England had its own centuries-old vampire lore that was easily transplanted into the northeastern United States. Indeed, vampire lore originally arose from unschooled but astute observations of decay. Bloated corpses appeared as if they had recently eaten, and a staked corpse would make noise due to the escape of natural gases built up in the body. This also likely led to a general belief that illness begat illness, and that death could begat death. The earliest documented vampire ritual took place in Willington, Connecticut in 1784. Town Councilman Moses Holmes from Willington warned people to beware of a man he called a certain quack doctor, a foreigner, who urged families to protect themselves against tuberculosis by digging up and burning dead relatives. Holmes witnessed several children being disinterred at the doctor's request and wanted the madness to stop. Holmes wrote, "And that the bodies of the dead may rest quiet in their graves without such interruption, I think the public ought to be aware of being led away by such an impostor." Unfortunately, few heeded Moses Holmes' wise words. As the tuberculosis outbreaks continued, terrified villagers reasoned that they had to dig up the bodies and examine them for signs of vampirism. If the corpse appeared to be less decayed than they expected, they sliced the body open and sifted through the internal organs. If any of the organs contained what appeared to be liquid blood, then the villagers deemed the corpse possessed. New Englanders at the time believed that slow-to-decompose corpses had become inhabited by some sort of evil spirit that sustained itself by draining the life or blood from the living. At a time when bleeding remained common medical practice, the idea of a spirit taking in blood did not seem outlandish to people. This spiritual possession had to be destroyed and the evil bond between living and dead broken. Villagers did this with a number of rituals that would gradually grow into a sort of vampire cult during the centuries to come. Sometimes these could be festive occasions. In 1793, a ceremony in Manchester, New Hampshire, saw hundreds of people flock to a blacksmith's forge. An early town history of Manchester wrote, "Timothy Mead officiated at the altar in the sacrifice to the demon vampire, who it was believed was still sucking the blood of the then living wife of Captain Burton. It was the month of February and good slaying." Yet the New England vampire panic was far from over. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.